Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. One of the most famous and frankly harrowing lines of all of literature. When, after seeing the ghost of the late king, Marcellus remarks to Horatio that something isn't right here. If we are seeing the ghost of the late King Hamlet, something has happened. Something isn't right. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Something is rotten in the United States of America. Today is September 11th. Yesterday I was wondering. I kind of shudder that I was even thinking this. Nothing will happen that will make something other than 9/11 be the headlines of tomorrow's news, will it? And here we are. Just a day after Charlie Kirk was assassinated in cold blood. In public, in full view of the world. For doing what he was called to do. To have debates. To engage with his right of free speech. To share his values. To share his thoughts and ideas with people who would just be interested in listening. Shot dead. Yesterday, my day began like many of my days begin. I was on the train to Washington, D.C. I was invited to hear Senator Ted Cruz speak about his new legislation to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. And so, as I always do, I hop on the train and make my way into Union Station. And upon exiting Union Station, I was walking through its Great Hall and couldn't help but notice all of the National Guardsmen. I mean, I think I spotted 12 long guns by the time I exited the platform till I exited the building. I remember thinking to myself, that's odd. And then I remembered that the president federalized the National Guard and has deployed troops to Washington, D.C. And I thought, wow, the president followed through to make this city a bit safer. That was kind of the only thought I have, and I walked out the building and headed to my meeting. After the meeting was over, I posted up to do some work at a local coffee shop. I was waiting for a friend to come join me when the three people at the table next to me audibly gasped. And one of them said, "Charlie Kirk's been shot." And I'll be honest, I didn't even process what she had said. Charlie Kirk's been shot. Like in a mugging, in a stray bullet. And then my friend came, and I don't have social media on my phone, and I just enjoyed a lovely conversation with one of my dearest friends. And by the time we had left the coffee shop and I turned back on my phone, I'd been inundated with the news that in fact Charlie Kirk had been assassinated. When I headed back to Union Station, I saw the troops in a very different light. This isn't normal. This isn't normal that the United States of America needs to deploy its own troops to guard its own train stations in its own capital. And this certainly isn't normal. That a young father of two, who, even if you disagreed with him, was just a force for good, is assassinated. That certainly isn't normal either. Political assassinations are world-changing events, for God's sakes. World War I began with a political assassination. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. On the train ride home, I had so many thoughts that ran through my mind. And I shared that I felt as if, even more so than the political violence of the 60s, that we had been encroaching now, especially since yesterday, on an era 100 years before the 1960s. That we were as close to 1861 as we've been in a very long time. And I don't say that to be hyperbolic. Let me explain. For a very long time, I've been bothered by a fundamental question about the American Civil War. We as a nation, we as a people, as Americans, have always been divided about politics. From our founding, we disagreed on many issues. And yet in our history, there is only one issue that ever brought this nation to civil war: slavery. Why? Why was it only slavery that caused brothers to raise up arms against brothers, neighbors against neighbors? It's a complicated question. But I think the answer is that you cannot simply understand the Civil War as being over the political issue of slavery. Slavery was indicative of something much more rotten in American society. The North and South didn't simply have differences of political opinion. They believed in fundamentally different realities. It was not the same America in the North as it was in the South. The two worldviews mixed probably as well as water and oil. It was, to pick Samuel Huntington's important phrase, a clash of civilizations. A society like that cannot live with one another. They cannot merely have their differences and have a beer with one another afterwards. It was a clash that led to one of the darkest few years in American history. There is, though, something tragically good, dare I say, about the American Civil War, which is that we were a better nation afterwards than we were before. It is a shame, a damn shame, that tragedy moves us to better ourselves. We ought to do that now. We have to change course in American society. You know, it wasn't always like this. There was a world of yesterday. Today is, in fact, September 11th. And for those of you who are my age, we really only know a world post 9/11. I was a few years old when the attacks happened. This is the world we know. I don't remember, obviously, 9/11 and its immediate aftermath. But I probably watched and seen all the documentaries, read all the reports about 9/11. And on 9/11, every single year, I wake up, and the first thing I do is watch the same video. Every year I do this. Shortly after 9/11, the Yankees were playing in the World Series. And at Game 3 in Yankee Stadium, President Bush threw out the first pitch. And there's a 4-minute clip of this moment in American history you should watch on YouTube. I encourage everyone to go see it. And the president comes out like this rock star that he is, throws the pitch from the mound, a strike right down the middle, and the crowd erupts. We, as Jews, speak in the aftermath of October 7th about October 8th Jews, about people who not only found God and religion, but there was a real sense of unity on October 8th. We put aside our differences that we had because we gathered around the same cause that was greater than our differences. There was a September 12th America. And in the end of this video, President Bush throwing out the baseball, the short documentary style video cuts to a man who says, I didn't vote for him. I didn't vote for George Bush. But in that moment, watching him throw out the pitch, standing there unafraid, I didn't care. I didn't care about our political differences. That was my man representing me on the world stage. There was a September 12th America. There was a world of yesterday. I don't claim to have a policy to enact that will bring us back there. And I know it's probably vapid to say that we need to change the tenor of American politics, that we've normalized so much evil, so much dangerous rhetoric. I don't know that there's a policy prescription that I can provide that might kind of spur on that change. We can probably do something ourselves. I cannot help but think, as I've just mentioned, that one of the reasons we got here is because of how normalized we've become to violence and to evil. Yesterday, something really frustrating happened to me. In the midst of this terrible news, this world-ending news, countless friends sent me the video. Sent me the video of Charlie being assassinated. That itself is a symptom of what's rotten in Denmark. That's a sign of something wrong in the United States. First of all, that people felt compelled to share a dead man's final moments on WhatsApp groups, to post it incessantly on Twitter. But more than that, it isn't normal to see that. It isn't normal to see a man being assassinated in broad daylight. We become desensitized as humans if we get used to seeing that. Think about what we do to ourselves and our humanity when every day we log on to social media and what we see is utter depravity. There are YouTube channels that you can go on and see people die regularly that have millions of views. It isn't normal. And we have ourselves to blame that we've become so desensitized to acts of barbarism, to the language of evil. And I genuinely encourage those people who sent around Charlie's death to ask yourself if we're not also contributing to the problem, to the to becoming desensified as a nation, becoming so insensitive to our basic humanity. It doesn't have to be that way. We have to totally change how we relate to the world around us, to restore our sense of humanity. And frankly, the best way to do that not only is by changing our content consumption and to get off social media and to stop believing that the internet is real life and to stop listening to just the most insane and inane hyperbole spewed by people on both sides about what quote-unquote reality of American life is. It's all nonsense. But more than just changing those content, our own content habits, is to do and to model everything that Charlie did. If we are going to change course in American society, it means that it can't only have been Charlie, who would engage with anyone he wanted to in peaceful dialogue, who would be willing to have a conversation about any topic with nearly anyone. We have to model that. We have to be willing to step outside our own ecosystem, our own few cubic centimeters of our kind of cushy private lives and be willing to engage. And I know that all of us who work in this space, and even if you don't, are probably a bit more afraid to do so now than they were yesterday. But if we allow that fear to take over, then Charlie died in vain. And it doesn't have to be that way. In our own small part, I honestly believe we could be the change in American society. What laws have to be passed, what measures have to be enacted, I don't know yet. I really don't. And I have no doubt that we should at least try to think of something. But in the interim, we can be the model. We can be the change. We can carry on his legacy. There was a world of yesterday. It wasn't always like this. I want to end by saying the following. I've been saying this phrase repeatedly over the past 15 minutes. The world of yesterday. Yesterday on the train to Washington, D.C., I was reading a memoir by the great Austrian Jewish author Stefan Zweig called The World of Yesterday. Stefan Zweig, probably one of the most famous authors in his era, loved Europe, lived in Vienna, in the great cultural hub that was Vienna, and loved his life, loved his heritage, loved his culture, until Nazism ruined his Europe. Zweig fled Europe, lived in exile, but sadly and tragically for a man as brilliant as Stefan Zweig, it was too much, and he and his wife committed suicide before the Second World War was even over. The World of Yesterday is his memoir, describing what life was like before things went south. Yesterday, as I was on the train, I read the following passage, and I feel compelled to share it with you all here. Live and let live was famous as a Viennese principle, a principle that still seems to me more humane than any categorical imperative, and it reigns supreme in all social circles. Poor and rich, Czechs and Germans, Christians and Jews lived peacefully together in spite of the occasional needling remark, and even political and social movements did not have that terrible spitefulness that eventually made its way into the bloodstream of the time as a poisonous residue of the First World War. In the old Austria, you fought chivalrously. You might complain in the newspapers and parliament, but then the deputies, after delivering their Ciceronian tirades, would sit happily together over coffee or a beer, talking on familiar terms. Even when Luger, leader of the anti-Semitic party, became mayor of the city, nothing changed in private social relationships, and I personally must confess that I never felt the slightest coldness or scorn for me as a Jew, either in school, at the university, or in literature. Listen to this. Hatred between country and country, nation and nation, the occupants of one table and those of another, did not yet leap to the eye daily from the newspaper. It did not divide human beings from other human beings, nations from other nations. The herd instinct of the mob was not yet as offensively powerful in public life as it is today. Freedom in what you did or did not do in private life was something taken for granted, which is hardly imaginable now. And toleration was not, as it is today, deplored as weakness and debility, but was praised as an ethical force. Such was the world of yesterday. We can have it back. We can model everything that Charlie Kirk was. Something doesn't have to be rotten here. And I pray, and I hope you join me in praying, that we bring back that world of yesterday, and that we carry on the legacy of a great patriot that was Charlie Kirk. May he rest in peace.